This episode may contain stories of domestic violence. Please be advised. Welcome to the Sage Advice Podcast, where each week we sit down with people just like you who have left abusive relationships and found healing. Don't forget to check out our website, sage.community, because together we can survive abuse with grace and empathy. Now sit back and get comfortable. The Sage Advice Podcast starts right now. All right, everybody. This is Erin, and welcome to this week's episode of the Sage Advice Podcast. We're so excited that you've decided to join us today. Today, we have a special guest who I connected with on Facebook. Her name is Janna, and she is a survivor herself and also has helped create a lot of tools to help other survivors. So we're kindred spirits in that way. And she wanted to come on the show to tell a little bit more about her story and to talk to all of you about the different resources she's come up with. So, hey, Janna, thank you for coming to the show.
Hi, Erin. Thanks so much for having me. I'm proud to be here this evening. Happy to be here.
Well, we're happy to welcome you, and anybody who is a champion for other women is welcome on this show, as well as any other survivor. So why don't we get to know a little bit more about you? Where did you grow up? What's your background?
So I'm a city girl, was raised in Kansas City on the Missouri side. And that's still in my bones. I've lived outside the metro area for several years, do plan to relocate and get back home to the greater Kansas City area at some point, but a Midwest girl for sure.
We have that in common.
Yes, good stuff. So I am in my early 40s. I am a single mom. And as you mentioned, a survivor, which informs all aspects of my life, from my day job to the advocacy and even my role as a single mom. It just affects everything. And it should, of course. How we work with that then is what's key, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of people, or there has been some attitude towards women that it's something that you can just get over very easily. Mm-hmm. And so I'm glad you said that, because it does inform everything from how you raise your kids just to how you are in general.
Yes. And even years later. So I'm already 10 years out of my abusive situation. So, you know, the long-term effects are real. And just as you said, it's not something you can snap your finger and get over because of how long you were potentially in that abusive scenario and all of the ways that it affected your psyche and your self-esteem, all of that. It takes years to unwind all of that. And then it changes who you are, because you want to make better decisions about your boundaries and your relationships and who you're going to be so that you don't get hurt again. So it's continual, and hopefully, if we're doing it right, a long-term growth process.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think, you know, the benefit of, you know, if you can call it a benefit of having gone through something like this, mm-hmm. is that you do become very well informed. And not to say that it can't happen to you again, which it absolutely 100% can, and often does. But, you know, it does give you that sixth sense and some knowledge going forward. So how did you meet your ex, and how long were you guys together?
So through a mutual friend who felt terrible years later when the truth came out, but didn't blame her in any way. Absolutely. The manipulation and smooth persona and smoke and mirrors affects everyone. So yeah, through a mutual friend, and I was married, and that lasted 12 plus years. So a good long time, not a short span by any means.
Was it mostly verbal abuse or physical abuse?
So this is the kind of place where it's so important to remind any listeners that it's not all about physical abuse, or that physical isn't the only kind of abuse or violence. There was one instance, and one instance only, I'm doing air quotes over my only, where I was physically attacked. That was early on. And of course, there was physical evidence. I had a black eye. And so my abuser realized, oh, hey, can't do the physical stuff if there's going to be evidence and I might get in trouble for it. So then the quiet, insidious abuses became that much more ingrained. So psychological, emotional, verbal, sexual, spiritual, really everything else, once the clarity came through for him that he couldn't do the physical stuff. And I don't want to say intimidation. Intimidation can be a part of physical abuse, of course, but it's not like I was restrained or kept from sleeping at night. But sometimes that emotional, mental stuff is a kind of intimidation too, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And something that I would talk to my friends about early on when I was processing and learning from my counselor was that you can't just look at somebody who's been physically abused and say, why wouldn't they leave? It's something we talked about on a previous podcast, because you don't understand if somebody's been hit, the amount of verbal and physical or verbal, emotional, spiritual abuse that they've endured still has a hold on them. Anybody can sit here and say, I would never let anybody hit me. Well, you haven't gone through the years of systemic, verbal, emotional, spiritual abuse. You just haven't. You can't understand.
All that conditioning in my experience and those I've been witness to, the conditioning starts so early and so subtly through those psychological tactics and the manipulation that you're already well controlled and not aware probably before the physical even starts, because that's an escalation. I don't know if any get punched around on their very first date with someone new. It takes time for that to become a piece of it, to my mind. And I forgot to mention financial abuse. 99%, right? I would say, I don't know if that's an exact statistic, but financial abuse too, big, and long lasting.
Yeah. So I'm glad you brought that up, because it doesn't, we haven't really talked about it yet. So if you don't mind, I'd like to dig into a little bit more of a conversation on that, because, my previous relationships have presented it as in the beginning as being very financially responsible and, very ambitious, having good careers. That really was not the case at all. And I didn't find that out until later. But one thing that has really pissed guys off is that I don't need them for money. I make good money. Yeah. I have my own house. And that was the downfall of my previous relationship, was when I purchased a house, and not my first house, and I didn't need him for input. That was when things got really tense and really heated. So that was, that's just one form of it. But I've seen where the purse strings force you to stay if you can't or don't have any financial independence.
It's absolutely true. That was my scenario. So I went into this dream of my future, anticipating that he would be a responsible, what do you call that? The breadwinner, basically.
Okay. Yeah, breadwinner.
Business owner, man of the house, all of those cliches that I unfortunately fell for, and thought that I would have this cozy little world of being a stay-at-home mom, and I would put my heart into the volunteerism that I had an interest in, and I would follow my writing passions all while I was raising my kids. And that's all fine and dandy if the person who's financially supporting you really does want to do right by you. But that just serves as, for an abusive personality, that just serves as more means for power and control, because, he could go spend whatever money he wanted and take several trips a year, go on guys ski trips or whatever. And I would get hounded and torn apart for spending $80 at Walmart when I went to get household items. And so you're treated, for one, that you only get an allowance if it's approved for reasons that he would see fit. Two, that you're not contributing, even if you're at home raising the children. Oh, sorry, you're not contributing because you're not earning $1. Right. So it takes on so many forms, and it can be keeping a victim from working outside the home. It can be doling out that allowance, like I said, hiding money from her, having this separate source of income and hiding money. It does so much damage. Oh, it can be using her credit and her credit cards to charge all of these items she didn't approve, and then she's got awful credit to go into her future with. So many different ways that the financial abuse can kind of grab hold and follow her years into the future. It's sad for sure.
It's so hard, I'm sure, for a lot of people to wrap their head around, but it goes back to that manipulation and the, systematic poisoning of your mind over time, so that I'm sure, and please speak to this, that you did not feel comfortable questioning him about the money.
No, because that was quote unquote his job, not my business. So you just kind of have to tuck your head down and do what you got to do and play along. And you mentioned a bit ago about this idea of financial success, and that's a big part of it too. There's this measure of smoke and mirrors. Oh, I make all this money. Oh, I'm so successful. I can, at the drop of a hat, take a road trip if I want to. And so this outward picture is, I've got all of this disposable income because I'm doing so well. Meanwhile, at home, the gas bill, the electric bill, the utilities haven't been paid for the family who's living in the house, and the electricity may be shut off tomorrow,
Right. And so I'm sure somehow that's your problem because you're in charge of the house.
Of writing the check to pay the bill or what have you, even though there's not enough money in the account to cover said check, that kind of thing. Absolutely true.
Yeah. I've seen it in a lot of, money is such a hard thing, especially nowadays, where it's almost concerning for people when they merge finances.
Mm-hmm.
Now, but back then, my parents never thought twice about it.
No, their generation
didn't have any money.
No. Well, and I think about that in terms of who I am now still as a single woman who now has gained some financial stability, and I've got my boundaries in tow and have this life that I have rebuilt on my own terms. And I think about, okay, so when I do meet another partner and I do make the decision to commit, if the situation is right, and decide what that commitment should look like, that's a thing I think about. Am I ever going to feel comfortable combining my finances with someone else's? Or, I mean, there's just so many different things to consider, and you have to take it case by case. The context is going to be so important, but these are the kinds of things that you now, for the rest of life, are on guard about. That's good.
Yeah. I don't think that I could do it again. I didn't combine them in the first place, but I definitely was more giving financially than I should have been, and then got stuck with, ironically, his lawyer bills.
Nice.
Which, is a whole fun other story. But
right.
So over the course of your relationship, had you thought about leaving several times before you actually did?
I think so. That is fuzzy for me, like many points throughout the relationship at this point, years later. I know that there were many, many times. Here's probably how I will describe it instead of actively leaving or trying to leave. It was more me kind of throwing a fit, or that's how it would be. That's how the narrative would be rewritten if it were told about me. I would throw this fit, so to speak, because I had had enough and knew that I wasn't being treated right, and I deserved better. And so there were countless times that was my side of a conversation that was one-sided, where I was trying to shout out that I needed to be seen and validated and respected and treated better. And so then there were instances like that where, or, in an instant like that, I would say, go stay at my parents' house for a single night or something like that.
Right.
But it was never, yes, it was more like me just checking out temporarily to get over my supposed tantrum and then returning to the same situation because of all of those little psychological tactics that keep you glued. So,
right. You start to question your own sanity a little bit.
You do. All of that gaslighting. You've probably talked about gaslighting on the show before. That is powerful stuff.
It is, because then, you start to think, am I unbalanced? Is it really me?
Is it my fault?
Yes. My friends, and, I think we touched on it a few episodes ago, but, are my friends not telling the truth? He's telling me my friends are lying to me, and that, of course, they would lie to me because they're my friends, but he knows the real me. All of that plays into it.
Right. All that twisty stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Hey guys, it's Erin. I'm interrupting this episode real quick just to let you know to check out the website sage.community. We've got some great new meditation classes up and a lot more to come. We'll talk to you soon. And now back to the episode.
So what was your final breaking point?
So for me, it was a different life change that kind of opened the door for me. My dad, who I loved dearly, had been sick for years and years and finally got a fatal diagnosis. And so we had just a short time with him after his stage 4 cancer diagnosis, and he passed. And so it was in that grief period for me after losing him that I started to take stock and look at my life and think about the people in it. And was I really happy? Could my soul sustain itself for the rest of my life in this particular situation? I have said to people before, you can't lose someone you're so close to and love so much in life and have that gap and not suddenly think about life completely differently. So
no way. There's no way.
Right. So he passed. I was working through that grief, and running parallel to that grief was this realization that, no, I'm not happy. I can't live this way the rest of my life because I do deserve better, even though I'll say at that point, I had no clue the word abuse described my situation. I never thought that anything I was going through was abuse. Yeah, that wasn't to come until later. I just knew, something in me knew I deserved better. And then I had 2 kids, of course, who were still young, about 5 and 7 at that time. It was the whole package that came to a culmination after the loss of my dad. And so as hard as that time was for me, it was so clarifying and completely changed the course of the rest of my life.
Yeah, I had a similar moment that literally just popped into my head. My uncle passed away right before I met my ex, and it was pretty raw for a while. And there was just a moment where I had his picture in the apartment that I lived in at the time on the windowsill, and it was like he was looking at me, and I was embarrassed because I knew that, like, oh no, he's watching this. And this is not okay. And that was it was an interesting moment for sure.
It is powerful. My dad had finally kind of started seeing the reality of who my ex was within probably the last 2 years of his life, of my dad's own life.
Yeah.
And had kind of tried to do the dad thing and say, hey, you shape up, treat my daughter better. And so knowing that he had gotten to that point and had stood up for me and tried to defend me to the best of his ability, given who he was, trying to have that heart to heart with, which obviously didn't strike its target, but knowing that, knowing that my dad had gotten himself to that place, and then after that, losing him, that just sealed the deal for me. So
Yeah. No, I can only imagine, but I'm glad that, you were able to see your dad stick up for you, and
Mm-hmm.
it helped you get to that place where you were ready to leave.
I think so, because, any woman who's been through this situation and made it to the other side knows it has to be a piece. It has to be you. It has to be driven from us, because no one else can tell us, hey, you need to leave.
Nope.
And it take effect and make us seal the deal. It has to be something inside of us that reaches its way out and sends us down that motivated path. But they definitely work together when you have support people who voice their concerns and offer a foundation for you to, I guess, pull that strength from, maybe.
Yeah. Open your eyes a little bit, but you also have to be ready. It's almost, a godly or spiritual thing, I think, when the timing is just specifically right for someone to say something to you when you're in a place to hear it.
Yes.
For me, it was just out dancing at a bar, and this particular person who knew my ex very, very well asked me flat out if he had lost his cool. And then I recounted a time where I thought maybe, which of course I was lying for him, but then she just grabbed my arm and said, "That's abuse. Do you know that?"
Oh, wow. So simple, but so powerful.
Yeah. And I didn't. And it definitely, hit me back. But a few weeks later, it was when I left, because it finally all clicked together for me.
Mm-hmm.
Just take that one little word.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Are you still friends with that person? Have you been able to thank her for that?
No. And they were part of his world.
Oh,
and
yes.
But I do thank her, and hopefully she knows that. But
really,
yeah. So after you left, what was that journey like for you?
Hard, very hard. It's still hard. So I mentioned earlier, I had been a stay-at-home mom for 8 years, as a matter of fact. And so I did not have a working history through those years. And so didn't have a basis to use as a springboard, job-wise or finance-wise, of my own to kind of lift me up. So finding a job, finding enough money to support my kids and me has been quite the journey and a struggle, I'll be honest. And it's not been easy. Sometimes still isn't, but that was part of the lesson I needed to learn to be able to count on myself and do the things that were hard and gain me independence that I never would have imagined I was capable of or even needed. I mean, you don't realize how much independence you need until you're forced to find it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been tough on another level because, shared custody over the course of time prevents you from getting up and starting over the way you really want to. So there are things that keep you tied when you share kids for a long while until they're of age.
Right.
And one of mine is of age and the other's getting very close. So we are at the end of our journey here with that part of things. But I have had an amazing support group and family and friends, and have been honest in my journey, which has helped me more than not. They say to be careful about sharing and how much you say and where you say it, especially if there's a custody arrangement and the involvement of family court. And you have to toe this line very carefully. And I have, and followed the rules for a very long time.
Yeah.
But then you get to this point where you realize you have to share because they want you to stay quiet. They shame and scare you into staying silent, which doesn't help your own journey and growth to keep it all inside. And it doesn't help the other women that you choose to look out for and hopefully help through the process if you can't share vulnerably. So even though it's been hard to be so vulnerable with my story, I have chosen to be outright. Sometimes it's polished a little bit to keep certain details that could be identifying or what have you out of it.
And that's important. I encourage everybody when they come on to say what you feel comfortable with and what will legally keep you safe.
Yes, so important, because we don't want to do ourselves more harm than good. And it is a fine line. But I finally got to the point where there's a quote by the writer Anne Lamott, and I may not get it exactly right, more of a paraphrase, but it's basically if they had wanted you to write a better story about them, they would have treated you better. And so
100%.
Yes. So I try to keep that in mind. And the fact that even though I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus, and I need to be very careful about telling my story and not telling my abuser's story, because none of this is ever about my abuser. He doesn't have that power over me anymore. My story is about me and what I went through and what I have done for me since. So some people don't understand that. And that's why they do that cliche thing you talked about at the opening, where they just say, well, get over it. You know, you're dwelling, you're holding a grudge. No, I am focusing on me and my story and my strength. And you have to have this openness that helps other women, if you're an advocate like you and I are, and helps you be real in your own life. Because for me, tell me if this is true for you too, when you've been part of an abusive situation that has so much false narrative and pretense to it, you come out of that and your number one goal is to live with integrity and authenticity.
Absolutely.
So I'm not going to hide. I'm not going to pretend that life is hunky dory and that I don't have struggles, because who does that help? Nobody.
Yeah.
I need my kids to see me being real. I need the people in my community to see me being real, because the numbers that you can touch by just telling your story, and you don't have to be specific, is mind-boggling. And that's what I'm here for.
Yeah. I love that. And I couldn't help but thinking while you were talking, a message that I would have to other people who are, you know, in the life of a survivor, especially Ben, there's no secret code that you're going to figure out as to why somebody is an abuser. And so stop focusing on that.
Yeah. Too many moving parts for that.
Right. And that's what I would get a lot. It's like, I wonder why he would do that. Why do you think he did that? Oh, I don't know. But does it matter?
Absolutely.
Because he's done it to more than just me. So
that's a really good point. Yeah.
Yeah. Focus back on us and less about what happens and why they're that way.
Absolutely. Because the whole time, the whole duration of the relationship, everything was about the abuser. Well, guess what?
Yes.
It's the survivor's turn now. It's about me, folks.
Exactly.
My turn.
So if we're, you know, if we overshare, just roll with it. But, you know, just try to listen. Just listen and try to understand what it could be like, instead of passing judgment or trying to figure out the psychology behind why somebody is an abuser. Trust me, we've done that for a very long time.
We've done it. There are books written about it that still don't quite get to the main point. So
yes, there's insecurities, there's blah, 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 blah. But it's, you know,
trauma, but none of that matters, because at some point, even if they did have childhood trauma or whatever, there's a point when they become an adult who should be able to make better choices. And so that's on them. And since we are at a place where we finally wake up and we can make better choices, then we get to do that and have strong, healthy lives. So
yeah. It's, I mean, I have said it, and I had a very quick temper after I left, because
you did?
Oh yeah. people's questions really bothered me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was probably part of the catalyst for starting this podcast to get the correct information out, or, you know, to give
right.
survivors a voice.
Right.
Because, you know, people would say, oh, you know, gosh, what must have happened to him? It's like, I don't care. Look what he did to me.
No. And then the victim blaming, like, I can't tell you how many people said to me, oh, well, you just like the bad boys. Okay. No. There's a difference between a quote unquote bad boy who's a rebel in a black jacket and a malignant abuser. This is not me attracting a supposed bad boy. So you're right. There's so much misinformation out there. There are people who, even if they've experienced it, they're not aware of having experienced it. And so they're just completely clueless. And it takes people like us, I guess, in the forefront, if you want to call it that, trying to help these other women. It starts with the women.
Yep.
And that's my focus. I mean, you know, my page in my community, Breaking the Silence for Women. Are men allowed? Sure. Are men also abused in certain situations? Sure. But
absolutely,
I'm a woman and I want to educate women because that is my purpose as it is yours.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us a little bit more about your page and how to find you, and a little bit about what you've created to help people, because it's really awesome.
Thank you very much. So my platform, which is a platform of education and empowerment for survivors of domestic abuse. So that's very broad because, as we talked about before, there are so many different types of abuse. Mm-hmm. But my platform is called Breaking the Silence for Women. And you can find me on Facebook. That is my primary zone. It's just I'm a creature of habit. That's where I'm comfortable. So if you search for Breaking the Silence for Women, you'll find me. And it's a public page. And so I say that because it's so important if you're a survivor and you're needing to mind where you engage so that you know who can and can't see that engagement. You need to know that Breaking the Silence for Women is a public page. However, yes, so important because a lot of people get confused about that. But with that in mind, I also have a private support group that has the same name. Breaking the Silence for Women. And then it's also in the name, if you search for it, Empowerment Group. And so you can search for it, but once you ask to be involved in it or allowed into it, then it's all locked down in private. I monitor that very closely so that we don't get the wrong kinds of people in there. Yeah. And that's where you can kind of let your hair down and share about your day and ask these questions you have about whatever current situation you're going through. So anyone is welcome to find me on those places. I also have a website called womandetermined.com. And that's kind of my parent concept. So back in, I'd say probably 2012, I've been a writer for years, since my first was born, and she's 18 now. So almost 2 decades, like officially a writer, not just stories as a kid or whatever. And hit on this idea in about 2012 of being a woman who is determined. And that would be something that I would take on as motivation in my personal world as I was rebuilding. And then in this platform that I wanted to build for other women who I want to encourage to be determined in their survival and their career journey and in parenting and all of that. So if you want to see a little bit more beyond my platform for abused women, you can go to womandetermined.com. And that's where I have not a whole lot, but some of my portfolio with links to where I've written before, some of my essays that have been published, and then some of the tools that you mentioned earlier. Thank you for doing that. Of guides that I have written. And there are more hopefully coming down the pike that I have created and put out there as resources for survivors who may need a little guidance. So if you don't mind, I'll just give you a very quick summary about both. So one is a guidebook about self-love, and it's basically a year-long exercise, just once a month, not overwhelming, a guidebook for women to follow And the exercise is really simple. You just write yourself a love letter. If you think about this concept of love letters that you read about in books and see on movies, we're always, we're always writing love letters to other people. Well, who deserves a love letter more than ourselves? So this concept was born out of that notion that if we could spend one day a month for 12 months in a row writing ourselves a love letter, how much could our self-love grow so that we become stronger, more self-accepting women? So that's one thing. And then here recently I did just a template. It's really simple. It's a 1-page template that is basically a guide or a prompt through writing an open letter to your abuser. And that one's a free printable download. And it basically just walks you through a couple different exercises to, in a healthy, honest way, purge these things that we need to say to our abuser. And disclaimer, this is on the materials themselves. We don't actually send this letter. If we need to write a letter to our abuser, it's for our purposes only. And so we're not going to stick a stamp on that puppy and drop it in a post office box. We have to just do this for ourselves. Nope. We think we might want to tell them what for and have them validate us, but that's not a possibility. So it's just for us. And I'm really proud of that one. I've gotten some really good feedback on it so far. So you can find those if you go to womandetermined.com, and then across the top menu, there's the portfolio tab. Just click on portfolio and then scroll down a little bit to the guides section, and that's where you'll find the content.
Fantastic.
More to come, hopefully, in the future.
Yes, I'm excited to do the love letter to yourself. I think that's something I need to do in my own healing. So I'm anxious to check that out. And I'm going to put, when I post about the podcast and let everyone know it's out, where I'll definitely put some links up to all of your resources and your websites. So thank you so much, Janna. It's been a fantastic conversation. I really love talking to you. And thank you for everything that you're doing.
Thank you, Erin. It's great. It's great to connect, and I'm glad to see what you're doing as well.
Yeah, we got to stick together and, get the message out there. So before we sign off, any parting advice that you'd give to women who are trying to figure out the healing process for themselves?
So I think the number one key to healing is patience, because we feel like we have to hurry up and we have to attain this next milestone and have, conquer this new goal. But we need to be able to sit with ourselves and be patient with ourselves, because it's a process like anything else. And there are a lot of moving parts to that too. And we just have to take it as it comes and not rush.
Yeah, I agree 100%. It doesn't always feel like you're getting better, but just take one day at a time, 1 hour at a time sometimes.
Yes, sometimes it has to be those little teeny tiny snatches of time to make sure that we're doing what we need to do for ourselves.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, everybody. Thank you for listening to this week's episode. Follow us on social media, Facebook and Instagram at Our Sage Community. And we've got a lot of stuff coming for Sage too. So check back with us next week, and we'll talk to you soon. Have a great night.
Well, that's our show. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions, or if you're willing to share your story, please email us at sageadvicepodcast@gmail.com. Until next week, remember, when you're kind to yourself, the healing can begin. See you next time.
This show was brought to you by inflowradio.com, the best curated talk radio network for personal development, wellness, spirituality, and conscious business.
If you or someone you love is in immediate danger, please call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-6565. SAFE. That's 1-800-799-7233. For more information, please see the resources tab at sage.community.